You are listening to an extended audio preview of Egregores and Group Minds, written by Adam Lusum and published by LLH Media. The complete book is available from LLH Media and selected online retailers. Chapter 1. Introduction to Egregores and Group Minds. Egregores and group minds are concepts that straddle the boundaries between psychology, sociology, philosophy, and the esoteric. They are ideas that attempt to articulate a phenomenon familiar to anyone who has ever participated in a collective endeavor. The sense that groups, whether small or vast, can take on a life of their own. In such moments, it can feel as though the group itself is thinking, feeling, and acting in ways that cannot be reduced to the sum of its individual members. This book explores these phenomena, tracing their origins, examining their implications, and considering their relevance to our modern world. The word egregore has its roots in ancient Greek, derived from egregoroi, meaning watchers. In its contemporary usage, particularly within occult and mystical traditions, an egregore is understood as a kind of autonomous psychic entity, created and sustained by the collective thoughts, emotions, and intentions of a group. The egregore is not a metaphorical being, but is often described as possessing a quasi-independent existence, influencing the group that brought it into being, and sometimes even acting in ways that seem to transcend the conscious will of its creators. Egregores are said to arise wherever people come together with shared purpose and focus, be it in religious congregations, political movements, corporations, or even families. Parallel to this, the idea of the group mind has developed largely within the fields of psychology and sociology. Here, the term is used to describe the emergent properties of collective human behavior, the ways in which individuals, when acting as part of a group, can display patterns of thought and action that are distinct from those they would exhibit alone. The group mind is not presumed to be a literal entity, but rather a metaphor for the collective intelligence, emotion, and will that can arise within human assemblies. It is the invisible hand that guides crowds, the shared mood that sweeps through audiences, the consensus that emerges from debate, and the momentum that gathers behind social movements. Although these two concepts, egregore and group mind, arise from different intellectual traditions, they converge on a central question: what happens when individuals come together in purposeful unity? Are we simply a collection of isolated minds, or does something genuinely new and powerful emerge from our communion? This book seeks to answer that question by examining the origins, development, and manifestations of egregores and group minds, drawing from history, science, philosophy, and lived experience. The study of egregores and group minds is not merely an academic exercise. In an era marked by unprecedented connectivity and the rapid formation of global communities, understanding the dynamics of collective consciousness is of urgent practical importance. From the rise of social media movements to the persistence of ideological echo chambers, from the workings of multinational corporations to the rituals of spiritual congregations, the influence of group minds and egregores is ubiquitous. Moreover, the tools we use to connect, digital networks, mass media, and organizational structures have amplified these phenomena, often in ways that escape our conscious awareness. To begin our exploration, it is helpful to clarify the distinctions and relationships between egregores and group minds. While the group mind is a concept rooted in the observable behaviors and psychological states of collectives, the egregore is more often described in terms that border on the metaphysical. For some, the egregore is a poetic way of describing the emergent properties of group consciousness. For others, it is a real, if subtle, entity with its own agenda. This ambiguity is not a flaw, but a feature, reflecting the complex and sometimes mysterious nature of collective human experience. Throughout history, people have sensed the presence of something greater than themselves in the context of communal life. In ancient times, tribes and cities often identified themselves with tutelary deities or spirits, beings thought to guard and guide the collective. In the Middle Ages, religious orders spoke of the spirit of the order, a force that animated their shared endeavors. In the modern era, philosophers and psychologists have described the Geist of a nation, the Zeitgeist, or spirit of the age, and the collective unconscious, proposed by Carl Jung. Each of these concepts captures in its own way the intuition that groups are more than just aggregations of individuals. The notion of the group mind entered Western thought most forcefully in the 19th century, as scholars sought to understand the rapid changes wrought by industrialization, urbanization, and mass politics. Gustave Le Bon's influential work, The Crowd, A Study of the Popular Mind, published in 1895, argued that individuals in a crowd lose their personal rationality and become subject to a collective mind that is impulsive, emotional, and easily swayed. Le Bon's ideas were controversial, but they resonated with observations of crowd behavior in revolutionary France and beyond. Later thinkers such as Sigmund Freud and Wilfred Bion expanded on these ideas, exploring the psychological mechanisms by which group dynamics can override individual autonomy. Meanwhile, in the world of esoteric and mystical thought, the concept of the egregore was developing along parallel lines. Occultists such as Eliphas Levi and later, members of organizations like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn described egregores as entities formed by the focused energy of groups engaged in ritual and shared intention. These egregores were said to possess a kind of spiritual inertia, persisting even after the original group had dispersed. In some accounts, egregores could even break free of their creator's control, becoming parasitic or destructive forces. Despite their different origins, the concepts of egregores and group minds share a common theme: the idea that collective human activity can generate forces, psychological, social, or spiritual, that are greater than the sum of their parts. Whether understood in material or metaphysical terms, these forces have real effects on human behavior, shaping our beliefs, actions, and destinies. This book is organized to explore these phenomena from multiple perspectives. We will begin by tracing the historical roots of egregores and group minds, examining how different cultures and intellectual traditions have understood the dynamics of collective consciousness. We will then turn to the scientific and philosophical foundations of the group mind, considering the evidence for emergent properties in human groups and the mechanisms by which collective intelligence arises. Next, we will delve into the esoteric and mystical traditions that have given us the language of egregores, exploring the rituals, symbols, and practices that bring them into being. In subsequent chapters, we will examine the practical manifestations of egregores and group minds in contemporary society. We will look at the role of group minds in politics, religion, business, and culture, analyzing both their creative and destructive potentials. We will consider the ways in which digital technology has transformed the landscape of collective consciousness, enabling new forms of connection and new dangers of manipulation. Finally, we will reflect on the ethical and existential questions raised by our increasing entanglement with collective entities. How can we participate in group life without losing our individuality? What responsibilities do we bear for the egregores we help to create? Can we learn to harness the power of group minds for the greater good? Before proceeding, it is important to address some of the challenges inherent in studying these topics. Both egregores and group minds are, by their nature, elusive. They are not physical objects that can be measured or dissected. Rather, they are patterns, processes, and presences that emerge from the interplay of human minds. The study of such phenomena requires a willingness to entertain multiple modes of explanation, from the scientific to the symbolic, the rational to the poetic. It demands an openness to ambiguity and a recognition that some aspects of collective consciousness may forever elude precise definition. Nevertheless, there is much to be gained from this exploration. By examining the ways in which groups generate and are shaped by collective forces, we can gain insight into some of the most pressing issues of our time. The polarization of public discourse, the rise of mass movements, the persistence of religious and ideological fervor, all these can be better understood in light of the dynamics of egregores and group minds. Moreover, by becoming more conscious of these dynamics, we can learn to navigate them more skillfully, both as individuals and as members of the various groups to which we belong. To ground our inquiry, let us consider a few examples that illustrate the reality and power of collective consciousness. Imagine a political rally where thousands of people gather in support of a cause. As the crowd swells and the speeches begin, a palpable energy fills the air. Individuals who might normally hesitate to express strong emotions find themselves swept up in chants and cheers, their sense of self merging with the mass. The rally takes on a momentum of its own, sometimes leading to spontaneous acts of solidarity, or in darker moments, to violence and destruction. In such situations, it is as if the group has become a single organism, thinking and feeling as one. Or consider the experience of a religious ceremony, where participants engage in rituals that have been performed for generations. Through the repetition of words, gestures, and symbols, the congregation creates a shared space in which individual anxieties and desires are transcended. The presence of the divine is invoked, not as a distant abstraction but as a living force that animates the group. For many, this is not merely a psychological effect, but a spiritual reality, a manifestation of the sacred that is accessible only in the context of communal worship. In the realm of business and organizational life, similar dynamics can be observed. Companies often speak of their corporate culture or brand spirit, intangible yet powerful forces that shape the behavior of employees and customers alike. These collective entities can inspire extraordinary creativity and loyalty, but they can also become rigid and oppressive, stifling dissent and innovation. In some cases, the culture of an organization can persist long after its original founders have departed, exerting a ghostly influence over new generations. Even in the world of art and creativity, the power of collective consciousness is evident. Movements such as the Renaissance, Romanticism, or Modernism were not the product of isolated geniuses, but emerged from the interplay of countless minds, each contributing to a shared vision. The spirit of the times is not just a convenient phrase, it reflects the reality that artists and thinkers are shaped by and in turn shape the collective psyche of their era. These examples suggest that the dynamics of egregores and group minds are not confined to the margins of society or the realms of the mystical. They are woven into the fabric of everyday life, influencing our thoughts, feelings, and actions in ways that are often invisible to us. By bringing these forces into conscious awareness, we can begin to understand their origins, recognize their effects, and perhaps learn to guide them toward more constructive ends. One of the central themes of this book is the interplay between individual and collective consciousness. Human beings are by nature social animals. Our thoughts and behaviors are shaped by the groups to which we belong, from families and friendships to nations and civilizations. At the same time, we possess a sense of individuality, a unique perspective that distinguishes us from the crowd. The tension between these two poles, the pull of the group and the assertion of the self, is a defining feature of the human experience. The concept of the egregore highlights the ways in which groups can exert a powerful influence over individuals, sometimes for good and sometimes for ill. When we participate in collective rituals, adopt shared beliefs, or align ourselves with a cause, we contribute to the creation of a force that is greater than ourselves. This force, in turn, shapes our thoughts and actions, often in ways that escape our conscious control. The egregore is both a product of our collective will and a shaper of our individual destinies. At the same time, the idea of the group mind invites us to consider the creative potential of collective intelligence. When individuals come together in a spirit of cooperation, they can achieve feats that would be impossible alone. The group mind is the engine of human progress, driving innovation, discovery, and social change. Yet it is also a source of danger, capable of fostering conformity, fanaticism, and violence. Navigating the dynamics of egregores and group minds requires a delicate balance. On one hand, we must recognize the necessity and value of collective life. Our greatest achievements, as well as our gravest failures, have been the result of group effort. On the other hand, we must remain vigilant against the dangers of losing ourselves in the collective, of surrendering our autonomy to the will of the group. The challenge is to participate fully in the life of our communities without becoming mere cogs in the machinery of collective consciousness. In the chapters that follow, we will explore these themes in greater depth. We will examine the psychological mechanisms that underlie group behavior, from the contagion of emotion to the formation of shared beliefs. We will investigate the rituals and symbols that give rise to egregores and consider the ethical implications of creating and sustaining collective entities. We will analyze the ways in which technology is reshaping the landscape of collective consciousness, for better and for worse. Ultimately, the study of egregores and group minds is an inquiry into the nature of human connection. It is a search for understanding the invisible threads that bind us together, for better and for worse. In a world that is increasingly interconnected, yet often fragmented and divided, this understanding is more important than ever. By learning to recognize and navigate the forces of collective consciousness, we can hope to build communities that are both powerful and humane, capable of harnessing the creative potential of the group without sacrificing the dignity and autonomy of the individual. As we embark on this journey, it is worth remembering that the concepts of egregores and group minds are, in the end, attempts to make sense of the mysteries of human association. They are lenses through which we can view the paradoxes of collective life, the emergence of unity from diversity, the creation of order from chaos, the birth of meaning from the interplay of countless minds. Whether we regard them as metaphors or realities, as scientific phenomena or spiritual truths, they offer us a way to understand ourselves and our place in the web of human existence. The exploration of egregores and group minds is therefore not just an intellectual endeavor, but a practical and existential one. It challenges us to reflect on the groups to which we belong, the forces we help to create, and the responsibilities we bear as participants in the ongoing drama of collective life. It invites us to ask difficult questions about the nature of power, identity, and agency in a world shaped by forces both seen and unseen. In the pages that follow, we will seek to illuminate these mysteries, drawing on insights from history, science, philosophy, and personal experience. We will listen to the voices of those who have grappled with the dynamics of collective consciousness. From ancient sages to modern thinkers, we will examine the rituals, symbols, and practices that give rise to egregores, and consider the ways in which group minds can be guided toward constructive ends. Above all, we will strive to approach these topics with a spirit of curiosity and humility, recognizing that the mysteries of collective consciousness are in many ways reflections of the mysteries of the human soul. Just as the individual mind is a source of wonder and complexity, so too is the mind of the group, a living, evolving entity that shapes our lives in ways both visible and invisible. As we move forward, let us keep in mind the words of the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead, who wrote that no one who achieves success does so without acknowledging the help of others. The wise and confident acknowledge this help with gratitude. In exploring the dynamics of egregores and group minds, we are in a sense acknowledging the help and the challenge of the collective forces that shape our lives. By understanding these forces, we can learn to participate in them more consciously, creatively, and responsibly. This, then, is the purpose of the book, to explore the origins, dynamics, and implications of egregores and group minds, and to offer tools for navigating the complex landscape of collective consciousness. Whether you are a scholar, a seeker, a leader, or simply a curious observer of human affairs, I invite you to join me on this journey. Together, we will seek to uncover the hidden currents that shape our world, and to discover new ways of living and working together in the age of the group mind. Chapter 2: Historical Roots of Collective Consciousness. Throughout history, the question of whether the minds of individuals can somehow coalesce into a larger shared consciousness has fascinated philosophers, religious thinkers, and storytellers alike. The notion that groups of people might be governed by an invisible but palpable collective force is not a modern invention. Rather, it is deeply woven into the fabric of human culture, appearing in the earliest myths, the musings of ancient philosophers, and the spiritual practices of diverse civilizations. To understand the roots of the concept now often called collective consciousness, and by extension, the egregore, it is essential to examine its historical and cultural antecedents. The earliest humans lived in tight-knit communities, their survival dependent upon cooperation and shared understanding. Long before the development of writing, these groups encoded their values, fears, and aspirations in the stories they told around the fire. In many hunter-gatherer societies, the mythologies that have come down to us speak of spirits, ancestors, or deities who are invoked not by individuals alone, but by the group acting in concert. The ritual dances of the Sand People in southern Africa, for example, are believed to summon the numinous power of the great god or the master of animals, a force that is more than the sum of its parts. The trance states induced by communal drumming and dance are not merely personal experiences, they are shared, creating a sense of unity and oneness that transcends individual identity. Similar patterns can be found in the shamanic traditions of Siberia and the Americas. In these cultures, shamans act as intermediaries between the group and the spirit world, but their power is rooted in the collective energy of the tribe. The shaman's journey is not undertaken for personal gain, but on behalf of the entire community, and the rituals often involve the participation of many. The sense of a collective mind, a shared field of consciousness, is palpable in these settings. The spirits that the shaman contacts are not thought to be separate from the group, rather they are seen as emergent from the collective life of the people in their environment. Moving from the realm of myth and ritual to that of philosophy, we find that the ancient Greeks were among the first to articulate, in abstract terms, the concept of a collective mind. Plato's theory of forms posits that individual objects and experiences are mere shadows of eternal, perfect archetypes. While this may seem removed from the idea of group consciousness, Plato also argued that the soul of the city, the polis, was analogous to the soul of an individual. In his Republic, he describes the city as having appetites, spirit, and reason, just as a person does. The harmony or discord of the city's soul determines its fate, and the rulers, guardians, and workers are likened to the parts of the individual psyche. For Plato, the polis is not merely a collection of individuals, but a higher order being in its own right, capable of wisdom, virtue, and folly. Aristotle, Plato's student, took a different approach but also hinted at the existence of a collective mind. In his Politics and Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle describes humans as inherently social animals, whose fulfillment is found in community, and suggests that the deliberations of the many may, under the right conditions, yield better decisions than those of a single expert. This proto-democratic idea rests on the assumption that groups can possess a kind of collective wisdom, an emergent property that arises from the interaction of individuals. While Aristotle did not posit a literal group mind, his work laid the groundwork for later thinkers to explore the idea. In the East, the concept of collective consciousness found expression in different forms. The Hindu tradition, for example, speaks of Brahman, the ultimate reality which underlies all individual selves, Atman. In the Upanishads, it is said that the self is the same in all beings. While this is often interpreted in metaphysical terms, it also has social implications. The boundaries between self and other, individual and group, are seen as porous, even illusory. The rituals of Vedic religion are communal affairs, designed to harmonize the participants with cosmic order, Rita. The chanting of mantras, the offering of sacrifices, and the observance of festivals all serve to bind the group together, creating a shared field of intention and awareness. Buddhism, too, offers a vision of collective consciousness, though it is often more subtle. The doctrine of dependent origination, pratitya samutpada, teaches that all things, including minds, arise in dependence upon a web of causes and conditions. The Sangha, or community of practitioners, is one of the three jewels of Buddhism, and the path to enlightenment is not walked alone. The practice of meditation in groups, the recitation of sutras in unison, and the mutual support of the monastic community all foster a sense of shared consciousness. In Mahayana Buddhism, the ideal of the bodhisattva, one who vows to attain enlightenment for the sake of all beings, embodies the notion that individual awakening is inseparable from collective liberation. Chinese philosophy, particularly Taoism and Confucianism, also reflects on the interplay between the individual and the group. Confucius emphasized the importance of ritual, li, and social harmony, seeing the family and the state as analogs for each other. The well-being of the whole depended on the proper conduct of its parts, and the rituals of ancestor worship and communal feasting created a sense of unity that extended beyond the living to include the dead. Taoism, with its emphasis on the flow of qi and the interdependence of all things, suggests that consciousness is not confined to the individual, but is a property of the entire cosmos, manifesting in myriad forms. Religious traditions in the West have also long entertained the idea of a group mind. In the Hebrew Bible, the people of Israel are often addressed as a single entity, their collective fate determined by their obedience or disobedience to the covenant. The prophets speak to the nation as if it were a person, capable of sin, repentance, and redemption. The rituals of the temple, the festivals of Passover and Sukkot, and the communal recitation of the Psalms all reinforce the sense of a shared identity and destiny. Early Christianity inherited and transformed these ideas. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul famously describes the church as the body of Christ, with each member playing a unique but interconnected role. For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. Paul writes in his first letter to the Corinthians. The metaphor is a powerful one. The church is not simply a collection of believers, but a living organism animated by a single spirit. The mystical union of the faithful is enacted in the sacrament of the Eucharist, where bread and wine are shared and the boundaries between self and other are momentarily dissolved. In the Middle Ages, these ideas found new expression in the philosophy of the scholastics. Thomas Aquinas, drawing on Aristotle, argued that the common good was superior to individual interests, and that the church and the state were mystical bodies with their own form of life. The doctrine of the communion of saints posited a spiritual bond that united the living and the dead, the church on earth and the church in heaven, in a single ongoing act of worship. In the popular imagination, this was not a mere abstraction. Medieval processions, pilgrimages, and festivals were occasions for the entire community to act as one, enacting dramas that blurred the line between the individual and the collective. Folklore and popular religion have also preserved the idea of group minds, often in the form of spirits or entities that are believed to arise from collective belief or emotion. In many European traditions, the genius loci, or spirit of a place, is thought to be nourished by the rituals and attention of the local community. Sacred groves, springs, and stones are not simply natural features. They are animated by the devotion and memory of generations. The egregore, a term that would not be coined until much later, is prefigured in these beliefs. The idea that the collective focus of a group can give rise to a semi-autonomous entity is found in tales of household spirits, guardian angels, and communal ancestors. In Slavic folklore, the domovoi is a household spirit who protects the family so long as he is honored by all its members. If neglected or offended, he may become malevolent, causing misfortune to the entire household. The domovoi is not simply the projection of one person's psyche. He is the product of the family's collective life, sustained by their shared rituals and beliefs. Similar figures appear in the folklore of other cultures. The lares and penates of ancient Rome, the kobolds of Germany, the tomte of Sweden, all are understood to be in some sense the spirit of the house, arising from and sustained by the group. The notion of collective consciousness is also implicit in the idea of the crowd, or mob, as a distinct entity. Ancient and medieval writers often describe crowds as being seized by a single emotion, fear, anger, joy, that seems to override individual judgment. The Roman historian Livy recounts how the Roman people, in moments of crisis, could be swept up in a frenzy, furor, that determined the fate of the republic. The crowd in these accounts is more than the sum of its parts. It has a mind of its own, capable of deeds that no individual would contemplate alone. In the Renaissance, the concept of collective consciousness began to be explored in more systematic ways. The revival of interest in Platonic and Hermetic philosophy led to renewed speculation about the relationship between the individual mind and the anima mundi, or world soul. Marsilio Ficino, the great Florentine philosopher, argued that the cosmos is ensouled, and that human beings participate in this universal mind through imagination and ritual. Ficino's translations of the Corpus Hermeticum introduced the idea that thought and intention could shape reality, not only for the individual, but for the group. The magical practices of the Renaissance, astrology, alchemy, ceremonial magic, were often communal affairs, designed to align the will of the participants with cosmic forces. The Reformation and the rise of Protestantism brought new challenges and opportunities for the idea of collective consciousness. The emphasis on the priesthood of all believers and the direct relationship between the individual and God threatened the authority of communal ritual. Yet the Protestant emphasis on congregational singing, communal prayer, and the shared reading of Scripture created new forms of group identity. The great revivals of the 18th and 19th centuries, such as the Methodist camp meetings in America, were marked by powerful experiences of collective ecstasy, in which entire crowds fell into trances, spoke in tongues, or wept together. These events were interpreted as evidence of the Holy Spirit moving through the assembly, binding individuals into a single fervent body. In the realm of folklore, the idea of the collective mind continued to evolve. The stories of witchcraft and possession that swept through Europe in the early modern period were often collective experiences, with entire villages implicated in the drama. The witches' Sabbath was imagined as a gathering in which individual identity was subsumed in a larger diabolical unity. The fear of contagion, spiritual, emotional, or moral, reveals an implicit belief in the permeability of minds, the possibility that thoughts and feelings can spread invisibly through a group. By the Enlightenment, the language of collective consciousness had become more secular. but the underlying concept remained. Philosophers such as Jean-Jacques Rousseau and G.W.F. Hegel argued that society was not merely a contract between individuals, but a living organism with its own general will or Geist. Rousseau's general will is not simply the sum of private interests, but a higher-order intention that emerges from the deliberations of the people as a whole. Hegel's world spirit moves through history, manifesting in the development of nations, cultures, and institutions. For Hegel, the individual achieves true freedom only by participating in the life of the collective, the unfolding of spirit in time. In the Romantic era, poets and philosophers celebrated the mystical unity of nature and humanity. The idea of the folk soul, or Volksgeist, became central to the burgeoning field of ethnology. Johann Gottfried Herder, for example, argued that each nation possesses a unique spirit, expressed in its language, customs, and folklore. The collection of folk tales, songs, and legends was seen as a way of accessing this deeper layer of consciousness, the soul of the people. The Grimm's fairy tales, the Finnish Kalevala, and other national epics were not merely literary works, but attempts to give voice to the collective imagination. The 19th century saw the emergence of new social movements that relied on the power of collective consciousness. The rise of nationalism, socialism, and other ideologies was often accompanied by rituals, symbols, and myths designed to forge a shared identity. The French Revolution, with its festivals, songs, and slogans, was a laboratory for the creation of a new collective mind. The Marseillaise, the tricolor flag, the cult of the supreme being, these were not merely political tools, but attempts to bind the populace into a single, revolutionary will. At the same time, the development of psychology began to provide new language for the phenomena that had long been described in religious and philosophical terms. The work of Gustave Le Bon on crowd psychology, for example, argued that individuals in a crowd lose their sense of self and become subject to a collective mind that is irrational, emotional, and easily swayed. Sigmund Freud, in his book Group Psychology and the Analysis of the Ego, explored the ways in which groups can create a sense of unity and identity that transcends the individual. Carl Jung's concept of the collective unconscious posited that there are deep layers of the psyche shared by all humans, populated by archetypes and symbols that emerge in dreams, myths, and rituals. Even as science and rationalism advanced, the idea of group minds continued to find expression in popular culture and new religious movements. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw the rise of spiritualism, theosophy, and other occult currents that emphasized the power of collective thought and intention. The concept of the egregore, as it would come to be called, was developed by esoteric writers such as Eliphas Levi and later by the French occultist Victor-Émile Michelet. An egregore, in their view, was a thought form or psychic entity created by the collective focus of a group, capable of influencing its creators in turn. Folklore adapted to new realities with stories of haunted factories, urban legends, and mass panics reflecting the anxieties of industrial society. The belief in tulpa in Tibetan Buddhism, a being created by intense mental focus, was taken up by Western occultists as further evidence of the power of collective imagination. The idea that crowds, movements, or even nations could generate their own psychic atmosphere for good or ill became a recurring theme in literature and art. Throughout all these developments, the underlying intuition remained the same, that there is something real, though perhaps elusive, about the consciousness that emerges when individuals come together. Whether described in terms of spirits, archetypes, crowds, or egregores, the sense that groups possess a life of their own has persisted across cultures and centuries. This historical survey reveals that the concept of collective consciousness is not the invention of any one culture or era. It is a perennial idea, arising wherever humans gather, cooperate, and dream together. The language and imagery may change, but the fundamental intuition endures, that we are in some mysterious way more than the sum of our parts. In the ancient world, the collective mind was often understood in religious or mythological terms. The gods, ancestors, and spirits invoked in communal rituals were seen as both the source and the product of group consciousness. In philosophy, the idea took on more abstract forms as thinkers grappled with the relationship between the individual and the whole. In folklore, the group mind appeared as household spirits, local deities, or the contagious emotions of the crowd. As societies grew more complex, the idea of collective consciousness evolved, taking on new dimensions in response to changing social, political, and technological realities. Yet even in the most secular and rationalist periods, the intuition persisted. The language of psychology, sociology, and anthropology provided new tools for understanding the phenomenon, but the basic insight that groups can think, feel, and act as one remained. In the modern world, the study of collective consciousness has become a multidisciplinary project, drawing on insights from philosophy, religion, folklore, psychology, and the social sciences. The concept of the egregore, as we shall see in later chapters, is one of the most intriguing and provocative expressions of this ancient intuition. But before we turn to its modern manifestations, it is worth pausing to reflect on the deep roots of the idea. What is it about human nature that gives rise to the belief in group minds? Is it simply a metaphor, a way of describing the power of shared emotion and intention? Or is there something more, some real force that emerges when individuals come together with a common purpose? The evidence of history suggests that whatever the answer, the belief in collective consciousness is a universal feature of human culture. From the ritual dances of the San to the philosophical dialogues of Plato, from the chanting of Vedic hymns to the processions of medieval Europe, from the revolutionary fervor of the crowd to the subtle workings of the collective unconscious, the story of collective consciousness is as old as humanity itself. You have been listening to an extended preview of Egregores and Group Minds. To continue reading, visit the LLH Media Store or the book's Amazon listing.